Well, welcome and good evening, wonderful dice of all alignments. I am Lunar D8, and this is Let's Play Crimson Gray, Dusk and Dawn, Part 2, Attempt 2. I made a recording, it was probably close to an hour and a half, but, well, toward the end of the recording I ran into a scene that I can't show on YouTube. And then I tried to figure out how to edit OBS, and apparently there is no editing for OBS. But I decided rather than try to look for editing software, because I don't like the idea of editing, because I just don't like editing, okay? I mean, maybe it's something I might have to do at some point in the future, but I don't like the idea of editing. So, that being said, I still can't show certain things on YouTube, but also given the fact that I probably spent a good 40 minutes going off on tangents that had nothing related to the story, it's probably best I just redo the recording. So I deleted the other one, and I'm going to record this part again. As you can see, we have a couple other save files before the sex scene that I can't show because it's actually explicit. So, part 2 will be me showing everything that happened up to that point. So we're going to go back to this save file, and I will try to avoid going off on the tangent. So, I should basically be able to speedrun this. I'm going to speedrun a book! They didn't have a lot of space, but there was enough for her to retrieve her axe from the cupboard and experiment with it a little. She hadn't experienced any more physical instability since the incident, leaving her very capable of protecting him, but she needed to be cautious. Though she didn't like to think about it, Lizzie had to admit that there was a small chance that she could hurt John by accident, even if they never had a serious conflict with Koitek again. She needed her knives to feel secure. The idea that she might cause the slightest injury by accident. Lizzie practiced carefully, both following through with all the force that she muster and bringing the axe to a halt at a moment's notice. The practice was soothing, and Lizzie soon found herself smiling. There had been a time in her life after she found him when it became possible that she might harm him. In order to preserve their love, though, those thoughts now struck her as alien and horrible. She would never hurt him. Him, never. But that meant she needed to always be prepared. When Lizzie finished, she discovered that John was watching her. She had no doubt that her expression was far from inviting, and she had been imagining cutting down threats to him. But he was watching her fondly. That's another thing. I learned that I probably should start recording smaller parts for videos that I think could contain something like, well, the scene that you're not going to see at the end of this video. Because, yeah, there's full nudity of the lower regions, and YouTube will not smile fondly on that. So, while I do not like editing or censorship, I must abide by the standards put forth by YouTube. How unfortunate that is. But yeah, definitely watch Raging Loop, AI Somnium Files, Death Mark, and Song of Memories. Emoto does a great job on facial stuff. And I mean emotions, they make emojis into actual, it's actually a real human face in a proper way. When Lizzie finished, I already read this. Lizzie beamed at him and returned her axe to its place. Are you done studying? For tonight, yeah. There's no point doing more, since I can read the work tomorrow. That's another thing. I'm going to make all the same decisions I made last time. So we're going to go the same story route. She drifted closer to him, smile broadening as she pored over his face. He wasn't too tired. He'd made a point of saying his work was done, and though he had been watching her with gentle affection, she knew there was more there. Lizzie eagerly slid down into his lap, her body pressing up against his. Soon she could feel the proof of his desire in his pants, and she cooed happily. But, though he put his arms around her waist, his eyes still watched carefully. But yeah, that's the thing. There's no editing in OBS, apparently. I would need a secondary software in order to edit these videos. Apparently OBS has no editing software. But I'm okay with that. I think it's better that I can make videos that have no editing in it. Like I said, I don't like editing. Not just, oh, it's boring and tedious. It's that, I don't know, I feel like it ruins the video. Yes, I might go off on weird tangents and talk about random shit that no one wants to hear, but at the same time, I don't know. I feel something of its soul is lost if I go around editing and deleting shit. Granted, that means there might be whole scenes you might not even get to see. But we all have our secrets. Lizzie eagerly slid down. I already read this again. Did I? Wait. Well, technically I already read everything. Okay, I get the point. But still, I read this again. I know you need to get up early tomorrow, though. Do you want to? Now, here's another thing I was saying about the Monica returning thing. That the mouse cursor is pulled on sex. You'd have to try really, really hard to go onto the option that says don't have sex. But I chose have sex last time. Grinning, Lizzie leaned in closer and kissed him. There had been so many small kisses throughout the day, each adding a little warmth inside her, and now she returned it all, kissing him deeply and passionately. His hands tightened on her waist, holding her a little closer. Most of the hesitance and uncertainty were gone now, since they were familiar with each other and each other's bodies. She had never had trouble needing him too much to be hesitant. But John moved more slowly. It sent a thrill through her every time he touched her confidently. Lizzie bent closer to him, and there was a knock at the door. Her eyes narrowed to slits, and she glared murder toward the entrance. We don't have to answer. Another knock, louder. No ignoring it was not an option. Lizzie sprang up from his lap and wrenched open the door. The boy on the other side was someone she recognized from one of John's classes. John said he was intelligent, and Lizzie didn't find him annoying. So under normal circumstances, he was fine. At the moment, she felt only rage toward him, barely contained within her smile. He was physically fit, but no threat. Her axe could be in her hand before he... Hey, Aaron, what's up? You guys want to check the news? Francesca Kelly is just gonna do it. Just do it. It took Lizzie an anxious moment to identify the name. A public figure, not someone they knew, related to the pharmaceutical industry. Not an immediate threat, but an annoyance at this moment. The news seemed to matter to John, so he headed to turn on the salvage TV in the corner. Lizzie reluctantly acknowledged that Aaron was going to be an entity in their life, at least for a little while, and allowed him to step inside. After flipping to the right channel, John watched carefully as the news report ran. Aaron slouched against a nearby wall, leaving Lizzie to hover behind John. When she heard Koitek's name, she began to pay full attention, soaking up the information. This study they're talking about, what did we miss? They didn't go into detail, but something about how sloppy pharmaceutical experiments used to be. A whole town of people got sick. Bad stuff. Lizzie's heart began beating rapidly. Was it possible that the report mentioned her? No, not her specifically. They were privacy concerns, but it might have referenced her experiment. Lizzie's fingers began twitching at her sides, which drew John's attention. He frowned a little, and then returned to Aaron. I'm going to turn down the volume just a little bit. How many cases did they talk about? Anything involving specific individuals? Just general information I heard. Why? Exactly the question Lizzie had been afraid of, but John didn't seem disturbed. I used to be part of the Pakistan trial that didn't go well, at least for me. I was wondering if it got mentioned. Oh, is that how you got clued into all this? Behind them, Lizzie let her fingers slowly relax. John had been thinking of her, hadn't exposed to any unnecessary attention. Of course he would. She was awful for doubting him. While she was feeling a warm glow, she missed John's response. Well, anyway, they only emphasized the biggest cases. Kelsey is trying to prove that the harms are large enough that the government policy needs to change. And that was how it connected. Francesca Kelsey was a researcher who used to work for the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Administration, FDA, but left a part of the protest. I remember that one thing I was saying, that this point in the story, we're like 1992, 1993, and somewhere in the US that's within 1,000 miles of Canada. Still don't get that Canadian comment from the last game. I literally just felt confusion there. But as left as part of the protest, she had been campaigning for increased powers to regulate the pharmaceutical megacorporation system. Lizzie usually didn't have many opinions about politics, but she approved in this case if it did damage to Koitek. She had never seen the woman herself, though. Lizzie watched curiously until the news station played a clip of Francesca speaking about the report, then began chewing on one knuckle. Though Francesca appeared serious and dressed professionally, she was too young for Lizzie's taste. Maybe it was fine for John to pay attention to her, since she was doing important work related to both of them, but his attention focusing on anyone else made Lizzie anxious. This is good to know, but why'd you run over here? The congressional debates is going to take forever. Oh, that wasn't the urgent part, they said. They said it earlier. Kelsey is going on a speaking tour trying to raise awareness of the issue. But not all the locations are set. We need to get her on campus, man. And I get it. I don't know how much help we can be, though. Well, and I wanted to ask you if you'd join again. We need more people to lead this if we're going to gain any momentum. John hesitated, looking toward her. His mouth had opened slightly as if to ask something, but he saw the tension in her eyes. Aaron looked back too, but Lizzie had pulled her finger from her mouth, and he couldn't see past her smile. It's going to be hard for us to commit for that, I think, but keep us informed about what happens, alright? Alright. I won't press. I'm going to go at Kelsey here, though surely we're a big enough campus. While John made small talk and walked Aaron out, Lizzie stayed in front of the television and kept watching the broadcast. Koitek had tried to take John away from her. She had feared 1,000 things, and many times he had calmed her fears, but back then she had been absolutely right. That's another thing. At one point I looked around this room and evaluated everything that was in this room. What is that three-dimensional object in the corner? I don't know what that is. An intellectual part of her knew that it was a huge corporation, manufacturing many common drugs. Not all of them were as ill-advised as Paxitine, not every experiment was harmful, and not every employee could be as terrible as Mrs. Smythe. It didn't matter, Lizzie hated all of them. But she couldn't hack apart the entire corporation, so she had no choice but to hope that something could be done. That was why she didn't mind people like Aaron so much. They could be useful. Maybe even this Francesca, but that didn't mean Lizzie wanted her to come here, especially since she might bring attention from Koitek. What was this? What she had been fearing? That was why they couldn't get married? That not with an event like this looming in the future. Not while something could go wrong. All too soon, the broadcast moved on to other subjects. Though the pharmaceutical giants were becoming increasingly important to everyday life, they were still usually ignored compared to the banal celebrity news. Lizzie didn't care about that, since random foolish celebrities wouldn't attract John's eye. She still moved to turn the television off, though. When she turned back, she discovered John watching her with concern. She had been aware that Aaron had left, of course, but that was at the periphery of her thoughts. Only now did she reflect on the amount of time that had passed. Are you worried about it? I'm just afraid something will happen. Koitek will be watching. John approached and wrapped his arms around her. Lizzie eagerly let herself rest against his chest. Maybe, but everyone will be watching. Francesca Kelly is one of their main political opponents, so they have to know that anything around her will be scrutinized. Even if Aaron gets her to come, I'm sure it will pass without incident. That was logical. It was probably true, and though Lizzie cut and recut his sentence a dozen different ways, she didn't discern any real affection when he spoke the other woman's name. She was just a political figure working on an important case, no more. She wasn't the threat. I know, but the reminder has me feeling so stressed. I understand. Let's just get some sleep, okay? Too late. Lizzie realized that she had worked against herself. Though she felt anxious and twitchy now, if he had initiated again, she would have happily welcomed it. Sex would have let her take her mind off everything else for a time. But now he would just worry that she was only doing it for his sake. And as much as she tried to convince him otherwise, it might trouble him. And that always made things less enjoyable. Accepting the way things had gone, Lizzie smiled warmly at him and pulled him back toward the bedroom. Please hold me until I fall asleep. As they lay together, Lizzie curled up against his side. She began to feel calm again. Being near him always generated a deep warmth within her, and just laying in his arms like this was peaceful bliss. Maybe John had been right to not have sex that night. Her love for him was depthless, but she wasn't as perfect as he deserved. Sometimes her mind wouldn't cooperate, or her past got in the way. What she needed most now was to lie here with him, together. For her, it was just another glorious element of their life together, and as John stroked her hair affectionately, she reminded herself that he was happy just to be like this as well. Smiling, Lizzie drifted to sleep. The warehouse stretched forever in every direction. Sterile, white walls, yawning toward eternity. In the center of it, they were impossibly tiny, yet they were everything. Her memory of the scene played out again. Mrs. Smythe having both of them trapped, trying to turn them against each other. In real life, she had fought back, John had helped her, and trusted her even at her worst, and they had escaped. But this time, instead of using an injection to cause him pain, Mrs. Smythe began removing her clothes. She cast Lizzie a mocking smile, then slid into John's lap, pressing herself against his chest. He struggled, but he was bound too tightly to do anything as Lizzie tore out of the dream and found herself bolt upright in bed. She had snagged her knife from its place and held it in front of her, gleaming in the moonlight. It took her a moment to come back to herself, to realize that it had been a dream. John was lying beside her, coming awake as he realized how upset she was. There was no fear in his eyes, but she could see the deep concern there. "Lizzie, are you all right?" "I'm fine, John. Just a bad dream." She gave him a beaming smile and set the knife aside casually, but her acting wasn't good enough. There were still those lines of concern on his face. It was wonderful that he had come to know her better and better, but that meant she couldn't keep herself from being a burden on him. For some reason, I used to think a lot of times in videos, I go off weird tangents. I need to try to not ramble on about weird, random things sometimes. It could be hard to shake those off. Come here and rest, Lizzie. Though she wanted to pretend that everything was all right, she couldn't resist his soothing voice. Lizzie curled up next to him again, resting her head on his chest. It did feel wonderful, pushing aside the remnants of the dream, but this wasn't how it was supposed to be. She was supposed to protect him. John was the one who was so sad, who needed to be protected from the world. He carried so much weight. She couldn't add anything to it. Lizzie bit her lip and squeezed him tighter, wishing she could be perfect. "I'm sorry, John." "Don't say that. I'm glad that I could be here for you." "You always are. Come here and try to relax." She snuggled against him, much of her anxiety fading. But what if one day he wasn't there? What if someone took him from her? She would bathe the world in blood, and it would do no good, because he would be gone, and she would have nothing. Lizzie slowly managed to let go of the other thoughts, and just enjoy his presence, but it took her a very long time to go to sleep. The lecture rolled onward, flowing around the edges of Lizzie's mind. She was absorbing some of the information, but her thoughts were mostly elsewhere. On the page in front of her, increasingly, she had taken a back corner of the scene so that it would look like she was dutifully taking notes, but in fact she was pouring out her thoughts onto the pages of her spiral notebook. Lizzie paused a moment, looking over what she had written recently. It was chaotic, but a familiar chaos. She'd written his name many times, frequently surrounded by hearts. In several places she'd drawn little pictures of herself killing Mrs. Smythe. It was playful, though, and writing out her emotions made her feel a little more stable. Thinking of him always made her smile, but Lizzie also stopped to consider John as analytically as she could. Her mind ran over the roll of images she held of his face, all the smallest changes in his eyes. He was doing better than usual, she realized. Though his smile was sometimes melancholy, it felt appropriate for him, and she didn't see any other signs of depression. There were no shadows in his eyes. That's something that you see in a lot of stories and books and real life. And he had been very affectionate last night. That thought made Lizzie squirm a little in her seat, molten lava dripping from her mind all through her body, pooling deep inside her core. She let herself dwell on that shared moment for a long time. Pulling herself out of her thoughts, Lizzie set aside a notebook and returned to her real notes. She didn't need to take many, quickly jotting down the key points to catch up to the speaker. Once she was done, her mind began to wander again. It seemed that the event planning had gone through. Their local campus activist groups had petitioned the right places. So now Francesca Kelsey was going to be speaking in town. That was a good thing, theoretically. It would disturb Koitek, and it would make John happy. Lizzie had read some of her articles to try to vet her, and Francesca seemed intelligent. Her visit would probably give them nice things to talk about. She was married too and had been for 6 years. Everything was fine, so Lizzie didn't object to them getting a little involved in helping to set up the event. Everything was fine. Lizzie absent-mindedly realized that she was gripping her pen tightly and stabbing it repeatedly into the side of the notebook, leaving it covered in gouges. After class, Lizzie headed out and started to walk her usual path, before she remembered that things had changed. Frowning slightly, she changed her route to head to the administration building instead, where she would be meeting with John. Others would be there as well. The exact purpose of the event was unclear to her. At a minimum, they would gather and receive information about the various activities that they would be doing in preparation for the visit and speech. Presumably, after that, they would go to do said activities and she could be alone with him. Except that he had expressed interest, which was reasonable. Perhaps they would participate. He had noticed her anxiousness, however, and not committed to anything beforehand. That was very considerate of him, but made Lizzie vow to do a better job supporting him. As she entered the building, she saw a crowd of people that had gathered. It appeared to be an ordinary enough college group, likely not a concern, though it was more difficult to evaluate threats in a crowd such as this. She searched through the random people in the way, but was unable to find John. Realizing that she was going to be engaged, Lizzie refocused on Aaron, who was coming to greet her. Aaron and 2 women, young and attractive for their age, wearing clothes that were stylish and extremely suggestive. Not physical threats, but potentially. When I first saw this screen, since it's the same design, because this is not how Aaron's girlfriend looks, but after like 30 seconds, this is how Lizzie imagined Aaron's girlfriend. I thought, like, what, are you dating twins now? Which Sorry about that, my mind wandered for a bit. I'm back. Lizzie gave all of them a brittle smile. Hey Lizzie, good to see you here. Hello. We're just getting organized, but there are a ton of things we need to do. Sorry, I'm staring at the tits, I'm sorry. We already printed out a bunch of flyers to put up. Hey, would it make it better if I say, hey, I'm not staring at her chest, I'm staring directly at her heart? Which kinda could sound wholesome and cute if it weren't a horror game, so. But we actually got space on one of the big boards, so we need some people to help design a poster, and we also, where's John? Huh, he's over in the corner, we're going to organize after that. Thank you. Lizzie left them, though she watched Aaron and the others for a moment. Aaron seemed to have noticed she wasn't completely happy, which was a problem. Being herself around John had made her sloppy, though Aaron also might be more perceptive than average. She headed through the crowds, searching for John. Part of her... I even slept and I'm still wanting to yawn. Part of her knew that the people here were probably decent, given their interest. No too many of them were here for just socialization, or a cause that made them feel good about themselves. There were too many of them to judge, and some of them could be threats. Now this is the one thing I saw before, like, oh, it's not Monica hasn't returned to, take my mouse over. But, investigate everyone in the room becomes eliminate everyone in the room. Ignore others and find John. Ignore targets and find John. Defend John becomes defend John with knives. Ask Aaron for information becomes interrogate Aaron for more information. And retreat, monitor the situation. Retreat, gather weapons, and monitor the situation. I went to ignore the targets and find John. Though many options presented themselves to her, Lizzie decided to take the simplest. Best to be prepared, but not do anything that might disturb John. That left her feeling a little more confident in herself, but Lizzie still searched for his voice in the crowd, and focused on him. There he was. Lizzie restrained herself as she simply skipped up to him, taking his arm like any normal girlfriend would. Her fingers dug into his arm, harder than she had intended, and he gave her a look with a hint of concern. Hello, Lizzie. Sorry, I'm late. She beamed at John to reassure him that everything was all right, then also beamed at the nearby people. Not like any threats, but she beamed hard at them anyway. I actually just finished organizing all the different tasks. Aaron is better at drawing people together than at organizing the details, you know? Haha, that's so true. Some girl laughed unnecessarily loud at his observation, prompting Lizzie's full attention to zero in on her. Slight pupil dilation, no visible flushing, heart rate slightly above average. Was that flirting? Was she trying to steal him away from her? But we haven't assigned any tasks yet. What do you think, Lizzie? Do you want to help, or do we have too much to do at home? It was an obvious lifeline to her if she was so too stressed, and Lizzie loved him for it. Of course, she could trust her John. He would always be true to her. "Aw, you might have to go. You need all the help you can get." The girl's gaze turned away from John. Too deliberately? A ruse? And toward Lizzie. She gave a smile that touched the corners of her eyes, indicating that it was authentic. But though Lizzie's automatically mirrored it, she felt only a cold hollowness. "I was actually hoping you could help us put up the flyers. I've seen you around campus. You're super fast." What game did she have in mind with such flattery? Lizzie failed to see the advantage the girl gained, but she disliked the situation all the same. Still, there was a wide variety of different tasks available, and not all of them would leave John vulnerable. Since she had delayed too long in answering, leaving an uncomfortable pause, it had been a very long time since her social skills had failed her like that. Worse, it was causing him stress, which was unacceptable. Lizzie pretended to be looking over an organizational sheet to buy herself a little time. "It's up to you, Lizzie, but I noticed that we need a couple people to move cabinets and desks out of the supply room we're going to use. Think we could do that?" Lizzie smiled as she realized that he was offering her a chance. Though John was always considerate when he was feeling less depressed, he was especially attentive to her concerns. The idea of participating wasn't unpleasant, but it would be so much calmer and more wonderful alone, at home. Lizzie looked up, smiled, and made her decision. Don't participate, let him participate, keep him safe, take care of it for him, participate together, take John's idea. I chose, take John's idea. Your idea sounded fun. John, let's do it. Seriously, that stuff is heavy. You're going to end up making him do all the work? Hee hee, I can provide moral support. The girl rolled her eyes at them, but didn't try to interfere any further. After signing up, getting the appropriate key, that left Lizzie and John to head to the supply room he'd referenced. In the old art building, they headed down one of the lesser-used hallways, her arm still linked with his. Being alone together in a place like this brought lovely ideas to mind, but since they were helping a cause that mattered to him, Lizzie restrained herself. Before too long, they reached the room, which John unlocked. The room inside was reasonably large, but filled with years of ancient desks and other furniture, not to mention a host of other random boxes. After I re-record this part, I'll probably go and take a nap. For some reason, I just feel like I'm tired still, even though I slept. Actually, I slept, woke up, and then went back to sleep, and I'm still tired. Nobody wanted this job, because these old cabinets are ridiculously heavy. I'm guessing that won't be a problem. Lizzie stepped over to one of them and pressed her hand against the side, tipping it experimentally. The metal groaned and the dust fell from the cabinet, but it didn't feel particularly heavy. There's nobody watching, right? Nah, people don't usually come here. We're only using it because most of the real meeting rooms are booked that night. Then I'll take care of it, no problem. They had a recycling guy coming for the metal, so we just need to take them out back. Nodding, Lizzie moved to the cabinet that was most in the way of the others and picked it up without difficulty. A box that had been set on top of it tilted to the side, and John snagged it before it could fall. Smiling thanks at him, Lizzie carried the cabinet out of the door he had referenced and left it at the edge of the back lot. Being made of metal, it was indeed heavier than average, but not really a challenge for her strength, because she has super strength due to government drugs. They soon found a good rhythm working together, which made Lizzie glow inside. She handled all the heaviest furniture while John organized the rest and cleared off boxes and other materials that would get in her way. Her strength hadn't been something that she'd ever given much thought, when she was growing up. First, it was something to be hidden to avoid attention, then an advantage to be cultivated. It had never been something that brought her any joy. That had changed the day that she had saved him from falling. Since then, she had realized that she could use it to protect him. That's the way all strength should be used, to protect others. There had really only been a few brief moments where she had used her strength to its full potential, but she was just happy for simple things like this as well. The two of them, working to move so many things, it reminded her of when they moved into their apartment together, and that made her imagine them moving into an actual home of their own, which was a wonderful thought. She would be overjoyed for that, no matter the circumstances, but it would be most wonderful if it happened after they were married. The tradition seemed meaningless to her in isolation. But the idea of doing it with John. Such thoughts carried Lizzie happily through the rest of their work, made her frequently smile over at John, and he smiled back, seeming much lighter than she had seen him in recent days. Lizzie didn't even mind that they were preparing for Francesca to come speak. Working toward it together with him, it didn't seem like such a bad thing after all. John, can you help me with these? The desks are too long for one person to carry, not without damaging something. Oh, so that's why you've been skipping them. Sure, I'll try. He acted as though he might not be able to help, but of course he came to assist her, as it really was true that she needed his help. She wouldn't have wanted him to feel condescended to. As strong as she was, there was just no good way to carry a desk alone. Between the two of them, it was no trouble at all to move the desks and finish cleaning the room. Plus, she got to watch him on the other side of the desk. He was used to her gaze and didn't mind it, though he needed to focus on their path more and she did to avoid running into things. When at last they finished, the room was still dusty and stuffy, but at last it was empty. More time had passed. I accidentally clicked. Than she expected. John didn't seem as surprised, but she was glad to see the slight smile on his face. It's not much, but we did our part to help. It wasn't a problem for you, was it? No, not at all, John. Thanks for thinking of this. Having said that, I'm definitely ready to head home. Me too. Though they were both a little dusty, Lizzie didn't hesitate to link her arm with his and lean against him as they walked home. Getting cleaned up together might be fun. That was another thing I went a little bit tangent on. Basically, having a shower with someone's really nice. You can make out and have a lot of fun. And while sometimes you get a little too cold or too hot or, tend to slip, the biggest problem is if you try to have sex in the shower. It's hard to line anything up. It's hard to make that work. But still, just making out and having a shower together is nice. When her schedule went unusually well, Lizzie found herself actually somewhat troubled. She had no reading for classes, the shopping had gone quickly, and nothing had slowed her down. That meant she had a surprising amount of extra time. On one night, John needed to work late at the library. For a little while, she busied herself tidying up around the house and cleaning her knives, but she found herself anxious. It was no serious premonition, just an uncomfortable feeling. She was glad to have him in her mind, and she was sure she would soon find his song again. But she also wanted him in the flesh. She spent a while writing in the notebook, many of its pages now heavy with ink. Though she wasn't a very good artist, she found it soothing to draw John's face. Perhaps that would be something to take up in the future. But that couldn't hold her attention for long. This was a bad night to be home alone after chewing on one of the knuckles for a while. Lizzie decided that she would just go to visit John at the library. She padded across the campus, noting how different it was at night. The normal dorms were still bright and would become progressively louder as the students started to party. A few were ambling further, likely drunk or stoned. They had been invited a time or two, but for the most part, she and John didn't have the connections to those crowds. Being together and off campus, even just slightly off campus, set them apart from the other students. Normally, Lizzie never gave the subject a second thought. Now she found herself resenting their happiness, all of them wasting their time so carelessly while he was working, alone and probably depressed. If she urged him to take fewer shifts, he would. Lizzie knew that, but as much as she wanted more of him, she didn't want to unfairly force him to do that. If John thought the extra work was necessary, then he was probably right. Still, Lizzie's eyes briefly flickered to a couple sprawled over one another in the grass. Neither a threat. They were pulling at their clothes, though, and well past the point of just making out. Before they finished college, she wanted a moment like that, not doing something like that in public, but simply being together by the trees, enjoying themselves. College should be a time of happy memories, light years between the drama of their meeting and the difficulties of adulthood. She wanted something she could remember forever, maybe capture in a picture. Yet right now, everything was so complicated. Lizzie frowned and looked away, increasing her pace. It wasn't fair. The library itself was basically deserted, since a few years ago, few were doing research on Friday night. Those are the I mentioned, like these lights seem to be very popular everywhere, and it seems like a very stereotypical library from what I've experienced in real life. That was why John ended up with a long shift, and why he took it, getting paid to do his own work. Lizzie found herself shifting to walk silently instead of giving any sign of her presence. This could be a good opportunity to observe him without him being aware. It had been the first way she had come to love him, and though the other ways, since coming to know him, were better, watching still held a special place in her heart. She peered through a bookshelf and finally spotted him. Around. John sat behind the desk, reading from one of his books. He was making decent progress, brows furrowed in the concentrated look that she so loved. But occasionally his focus seemed to waver. She noticed his eyes grow a little distant, and he had to backtrack on the page. Sometimes when he did, he would look at a sheet of paper beside him for a while, occasionally make a note. Were they just his notes? But she knew John's note-taking habits extremely well, and that wasn't how he usually operated. It was as if he was trying to read, but simultaneously distracted by thoughts of something else. Lizzie trusted completely that whatever he was working on was important, but she could also see that he was getting tired. John always tried to push himself too far, letting his energy run down and often leading him to become depressed again. Smiling to herself, Lizzie straightened. The library was empty. Maybe he needed something a little different. Now, we have fun. Just watch him or try to see what he's writing. I chose to have some fun, which is why we got to a sex scene. Lizzie smiled and approached him, making sure to make enough noise for him to hear. She wished that she was wearing something sexier than sweatpants and a t-shirt, but it would be fine. John looked up and smiled. Okay, glad to see you. Nothing to do at home either, huh? I did everything already. You don't seem to be too busy. Either. She shifted her posture, leaning on his desk, and arched her back toward his strategically. Her smile shifted from pure happiness to pure desire. The effect was not lost on him. And that was another thing I mentioned, like the biggest turn on for me in a relationship is, well, my partner being nice to me, my partner treating me with respect, my partner actually caring about my feelings, or just when somebody flirts with me, or they're, smiling at me, or being affectionate, or smiling, or basically the idea that someone else is sexually turned on by me, who is someone that I'm attracted to as well, in an environment that I feel safe with. But the fact that probably my biggest turn on is feeling safe and loved, and someone finding me attractive is probably not the same as for everybody. I mean, it's probably something everyone takes as a given. Maybe it's just my lack of that basic thing, or experiences to a great deal of the opposite. But main thing is, affection is nice. True, loving affection. Wow, you look great, but am I supposed to be working right now? You're supposed to help people who come in a library, right? I'm the only one who needs something right now. Without breaking eye contact, Lizzie slid an arm up one of her shirt sleeves and pulled the strap off her bra over the shoulder, then repeated with the other arm. John swallowed but kept watching as she reached behind her back and under her shirt, making it ride up her stomach a little. Preparation complete, Lizzie undid the clasp and wriggled out of her bra, then pulled it from her shirt and held it dangling from one hand. This is another thing I mentioned, that I had gotten hit by a truck at one point, and I was driving, but I was still fairly new to driving. I was much younger back then. I was very, very new to driving. And, well, a full-size pickup truck going 75 miles an hour hit me right at my driver's side. That hurt quite a bit. My alternator somehow ended up in my back seat. It's kind of a surprise I lived through that. I actually tried to flirt with the paramedic. She was cute. I was asking, like, how's your day going? She's like, better than yours. I'm like, I couldn't move my left arm at all, but it was twitching a lot uncontrollably. It took me about 3 months to be able to raise my left arm like a normal person again. I had a lot of getting like a dozen or so staples on the left side of my head. I think all my ribs are bruised, and even with Vicodin in my system, it would take me 2 minutes to go from laying down to just sitting up. I had some friends at that point. I went over to play some video games with them, but I was just sort of half leaned and half crouched into the side of a couch. I was on the couch, but I couldn't sit up straight, and it was too painful to lay down, and I wouldn't be able to look at the screen like that. So I was just I had myself propped up with some pillows in the side of the couch. I couldn't move my left arm, but I could do everything fine with my right arm. So I held the controller and put it by my left waist where my left arm was dangling. And I put the part of the controller that I needed to use my left hand into my hand, and I could still use my thumb perfectly fine. So I could use directional buttons. And my right hand was fine, so I was still able to beat people at Mortal Kombat and other fighting games, so that was kind of cool. Though I still occasionally threw up a little bit. Pain medication didn't seem to settle very well, and I didn't have much of an appetite. I suppose the other thing worth mentioning is just my legs were covered in bruises. They were black and brown, and they were swollen so much. It was like, and the texture, when I pushed on it, it felt, you ever get a basketball and it was overstuffed to the point that it feels like it's going to explode? And even just the texture of the basketball and the hardness of it, just all over my legs. But yeah, I don't have that kind of flexibility with my arms. So I'm glad I don't have to do something like that with my arms, because my arms, while they work well enough to do my job, I don't have that kind of flexibility. John, don't make me have done that for nothing. You can take a break, right? Speaking of which, we are going to take a break, because after this is the part where I had to be like, oh shit, I can't show that on YouTube. But at that point I was like 2 hours into the recording, and right now we're 42 minutes in the recording, because I kept going off on tangents and just rambling and rambling and rambling and rambling. And I really need to try to stay focused on, the story. I mean, you guys don't want to hear me talk about random shit that has nothing to do with this. So I need to try harder to control just the tangents I go on. But anyway, I hope everyone had a good day, and I think I'll go take a nap. Bye.